Hi, welcome to another video. So Qwen 3.6 27B looks extremely interesting if you care about open models for coding agents. And in this video, I want to talk about what it is, how you can install it right now, and especially how you can use it with Hermes Agent. Because honestly, that is the part that matters most to me. I do not just want a model that looks good in a benchmark screenshot and then falls apart the second you put it inside an actual tool using workflow. I want something that can reason over code, stay on task, use tools properly, work with long context, and actually feel good inside agent systems. And Qwen 3.6 very much seems like that kind of model. From the Qwen side, the main pitch here is agentic coding and thinking preservation. So, in simple terms, they are basically saying that this model is better at real coding workflows, better at repository level reasoning, and better at keeping the thread of what it was doing over longer interactions instead of getting lost halfway through. And that is exactly the kind of thing you want for tools like Kilo CLI, KiloClaw, and especially Hermes Agent. Now, one quick clarification before we go deeper. At the time of recording this video, Qwen 3.6 is available on Ollama, but only the 35B A3B1. The 27B variant is not on Ollama yet, so if you specifically want the 27B variant, then you will need to wait a bit longer on the Ollama side. And I do think it should be available soon enough, because once a major Qwen release starts spreading through the ecosystem, Ollama support for the other variants usually follows. But for now, the best route is vLLM anyway, especially if your goal is not just casual chatting, but actual agent workflows. So, let's talk about installation first. The easiest serious route right now is to serve Qwen 3.6 27B with vLLM, and then connect your agent tools to that OpenAI-compatible endpoint. That gives you flexibility. It gives you a cleaner integration story, and it also makes it much easier to wire the model into tools that already understand OpenAI-style APIs. First, make sure you have Python and UV installed. Then create a fresh environment if you want to keep things clean. After that, install vLLM. You can do that with a command like uv pip install vLLM. Once that is done, start the server with the model name. So the idea is that you run vLLM serve, then the Qwen model name, then your port, your max model length, and your tensor parallel settings depending on your hardware. If the model has tool calling support exposed in the serving stack, then make sure you enable auto tool choice and the proper parser as well. That matters a lot. Because if you forget that part, then you may end up with a model that looks decent in chat, but becomes much more annoying inside an agent because it keeps describing tool use instead of actually calling tools. So for a more complete command, the flow is basically this. Run vLLM serve, then the Qwen 3.6 27B model name, then -- port 8000, then your tensor parallel size, then -- max model len with something high enough for your setup, and then the tool calling flags if supported for that release. Now, I would personally keep the context as high as my hardware can handle, because one of the big appeals of Qwen 3.6 is that longer context agent workflows are supposed to be much stronger here. If you cut that down too aggressively, then you are leaving one of the nicer advantages on the table. Now, what about MLX? If you're on a Mac, especially Apple Silicon, then I think MLX support should also be available soon enough for this kind of release. Qwen models usually move into the MLX ecosystem fairly quickly, and once the proper conversions are up and stable, that is going to be a very nice route for Mac users who want a more native local experience. So right now I would say vLLM is the main recommendation, but MLX is definitely something worth keeping an eye on. And if you are a Mac user, that may actually become your preferred route once everything settles. Now, let's talk about why I think this model is especially interesting for coding agents. There are plenty of models that are fine in normal chat, but weird inside agents. Sometimes they over-explain instead of acting. Sometimes they lose the thread of the task. Sometimes they start changing things they were not supposed to change. Sometimes they use tools badly, or they get too cautious, or they become too verbose, or they just forget what the user even wanted after a few turns. That is the kind of stuff that makes an agent workflow feel bad. Qwen 3.6, at least from the positioning and the early reactions, seems much more aligned toward actual coding work, and that is why I think it fits well with the whole coding agent stack. Now let me come to Kilo CLI first. Kilo CLI is a very natural place to use a model like this because Kilo already supports external providers and OpenAI-compatible setups. So if you already have Qwen 3.6 27B running behind vLLM on localhost port 8000, then wiring it into Kilo is pretty straightforward. First, install Kilo CLI if you have not already. You can do that by running npm install -g at kilocode/CLI. Then open Kilo, go into the provider setup, choose the OpenAI-compatible option, set the base URL to your local vLLM endpoint, and then set the model name to your Qwen 3.6 27B model ID. If you configured an API key on your local endpoint, then add that too. If not, and it is only local, you can usually leave that simple. And that is basically it. So you get Kilo's interface and workflow, but backed by your own Qwen model instead of some default hosted provider. That is pretty great for people who want more control. Now, what about KiloClaw? KiloClaw is more about the hosted agent experience. So instead of you self-hosting everything and babysitting the process, KiloClaw gives you that OpenClaw-style persistent agent setup with much less hassle. If Qwen 3.6 27B is already in the model dropdown by the time you're watching this, then great, just pick it while creating the instance. If it is not there yet, then I would expect it to land sooner or later, because this is exactly the kind of coding-focused open model that makes sense in that ecosystem. And even if you're waiting on that specific entry, it is still useful to know that KiloClaw is a good destination for a model like this, because persistent agent workflows are really where coding-focused models get to show what they can do. Now, the main part of this video is Hermes Agent, because this is honestly where I think Qwen 3.6 27B gets especially compelling. Hermes Agent already makes a lot of sense. If you want an open source agent system with good flexibility, local options, provider routing, messaging integrations, and all that sort of stuff. And once you combine that with a local Qwen 3.6 setup through vLLM, it becomes a very nice stack. So let's talk about how to configure it. First, install Hermes Agent using the official installer or the install instructions from the Hermes docs. Once Hermes is installed, you can use the built-in model configuration flow. The easiest route is to run Hermes model and then choose the custom endpoint option. This is the option you want for self-hosted endpoints like vLLM. Then set the base URL to http://localhost:8000/v1. After that, enter the model name for your Qwen 3.6 27B endpoint. If your local server does not require an API key, then leave that simple. If it does, then provide the key you configured, and that will usually get you most of the way there. But I also want to talk about the config file approach, because a lot of you will probably prefer to set it explicitly. So open your .hermes/config.yaml file. Then make sure your provider is pointing to the custom or OpenAI-compatible endpoint you want to use. Set the base URL to http://localhost:8000/v1. Set the default model to your Qwen 3.6 27B model ID. And if Hermes does not infer context limits in the way you want, then set those values more explicitly, so the model is not artificially constrained. That part is worth doing, because one of the easiest ways to make a long context model feel underwhelming is to accidentally run it in a tiny context window and then blame the model for it. Now, another important thing is tool use behavior. If you put any model inside an agent framework, you want to make sure it is actually calling tools properly instead of narrating what it wishes it could do. So if Qwen starts acting a bit too descriptive instead of taking action, I would look at Hermes's tool use enforcement settings and make sure the model is being nudged properly there. That can genuinely improve reliability a lot in real usage. Another nice thing is that Hermes subagents can inherit the main model setup. So if your parent agent is already running on Qwen 3.6 27B through your vLLM endpoint, then your delegated child agents can follow that same path too. That is good because it keeps the workflow more consistent and avoids weird provider mismatches halfway through a task. And this is where the whole thing starts to feel really nice. You have a local or self-hosted Qwen model. You have Hermes Agent on top of it. You get the benefits of a strong coding-focused model, plus the agent orchestration layer, plus tool use, plus memory, plus messaging integrations, plus the broader Hermes ecosystem. That is a very good combo for sure. Now, would I recommend everyone jump into this immediately? It depends. If you just want the easiest possible thing and you do not care about the 27B specifically, then Ollama with the currently available Qwen 3.6 35B A3B is simpler. But if your actual goal is to use the 27B variant now and plug it into coding agents in a more serious way, then vLLM is the route that makes the most sense. And if you're a Mac user, then keep watching the MLX ecosystem too, because that should become a very attractive option once the support is fully there and stable. So my recommendation would be something like this. If you want quick and easy, use Ollama, but remember that the 27B variant is not there yet. If you want the 27B right now, use vLLM. If you want to plug it into Kilo CLI, use the OpenAI-compatible provider setup. If you want a hosted persistent agent flow, keep an eye on KiloClaw. And if you want the integration I am most excited about, use Hermes Agent with a custom vLLM endpoint. That is probably the sweetest setup here if you are the kind of person who actually likes working with coding agents rather than just benchmarking them. Overall, I think Qwen 3.6 27B looks very promising. It seems focused on the right things, it fits the current agentic coding trend very well, and the integration path with tools people already use is quite solid, and that matters a lot. Because even a very good model is not that useful if the setup story is annoying. Here, the setup is actually pretty reasonable. Serve it with vLLM. Point your tools at the endpoint. Use it in Kilo CLI or KiloClaw if that fits your workflow. And if you want the more serious open source agent route, configure it with Hermes Agent and let it do actual work. Overall, it's pretty cool. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this video, consider donating through the Super Thanks option or becoming a member by clicking the Join button. Also, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye.